So session 2 is practicing mindfulness. And mindfulness has 4 key roles in the MSC program. Number 1, we need mindfulness as kind of present moment awareness, and we need to know when we're suffering in order to have a compassionate response. So we teach mindfulness in the second session so that we get some traction with suffering. Number 2, since self-compassion is emotionally activating, we need to have a way of grounding ourselves in the present moment. And a lot of the mindfulness practice that we do in the MSC program is of that nature. Anchoring in the feet, anchoring in the breath, anchoring in sights and sounds in order to create space for self-compassion practice. Number 3, this program is a lot about managing difficult emotions, emotion regulation. And so, excuse me, when difficult emotions arise, if they don't pass naturally on their own, then we encourage people to practice mindfulness, particularly naming the emotion and finding the emotion in the body, and then relating compassionately to that part of the body that's holding the emotion. And that's a very powerful way of regulating difficult emotions. And finally, mindfulness, moment-to-moment awareness is also known as spacious awareness. And actually in traditional Buddhist psychology, mindfulness has even more to do with equanimity. And we really need equanimity in order to practice self-compassion. Equanimity is also a foundation for wisdom. So we look at mindfulness as a way of sort of creating a frame, kind of a balanced awareness so that we don't get either swept up in difficult emotions that arise when we practice compassion or with giddiness from all the joy that naturally arises with compassion. And also there are what we like to say is that self-compassion and mindfulness are BFF, best friends forever. Kristen says that they're kind of like 2 people doing a beautiful dance together. And also, when mindfulness is in full bloom, it usually brings along qualities of compassion. Usually there's a ton of compassion in it. And when compassion is in full bloom, there's usually a lot of mindfulness. In other words, you're aware of what's going on. But mostly our compassion or our mindfulness is not in full bloom. So then we need to explicitly perhaps add something. And therefore, it's good to know kind of what these different practices do. So we like to say that mindfulness focuses primarily on acceptance of moment-to-moment experience. This feeling, this thought, this sensation. Compassion focuses on the experiencer. So one is loving awareness of experience, the other is loving awareness of the experiencer. Mindfulness asks, what am I experiencing right now? And compassion asks, this is a different question, what do I need right now? Mindfulness says, feel your suffering in spacious awareness. And compassion says, be kind to yourself when you suffer. So compassion is really quite personal. It's about one entity to another. You can't have compassion for anger. You can only have compassion for a person who feels anger. It's very personal. And sometimes, like with my public speaking anxiety problem, what I realize is sometimes, and which had a lot of shame in it, I realized that sometimes you have to hold yourself before you can hold your experience. And so particularly when we're caught in intense and difficult emotions, we need self-compassion in order to be mindful. And also, mindfulness is very closely associated with what we call the central paradox of self-compassion, and that is, when we suffer, we practice not to feel better, but because we feel bad. This is a paradox. And this is a paradox that you can know, and you can tell yourself over and over again, but you will still slip into practicing in order to feel better. And if you practice in order to feel better, it's probably a subtle form of resistance. In other words, we're trying to manipulate how we feel moment to moment, and what we resist persists. In fact, what we resist kind of amplifies. So what we're really inviting people to do over time, and this is what we teach throughout the whole self-compassion program, this is one of the kind of keys to the MSC program, is imagine that you, for example, have a child with the flu. And this is, every kid at school has the flu, and it's a 5-day flu, and your kid has just come back, and this is day 1. And so your child is lying in bed, oh, mommy, oh, daddy, I feel so bad. And you're kind to the child, right? You naturally try to help the child, do something for the child. Now, you don't have a thought in your back of your mind, oh, I'm going to be nice to this kid so that my kid kind of has a 2-day flu when everybody has a 5-day flu. No, you do it naturally. Your heart opens because the child is suffering. Okay? Now, all of us have the flu. It's actually a lifelong flu. It's called human suffering. We all struggle. But when we struggle, we get into this kind of strategic thing. We say, oh, what I should do is I should fix it like this, and I should do that, and I should do this and that. What would happen if, when we are suffering, our hearts melt in the heat of suffering as they would toward a child with the flu? What would your life be like if you could feel the same tenderness toward yourself when you're suffering as you might toward a beloved child? In other words, a spontaneous melting of the heart. That's what we're aiming for. That's what we're going for. And when people start to practice, they're always practicing a little bit of a struggle to sort of drive out their suffering. But the goal is this. The goal is to simply let the heart melt in the heat of suffering. I did want to say that we do teach the first core meditation, affectionate breathing. So just like most mindfulness programs, we do breath meditation. But we focus on the rhythm of the breath, the natural rhythm of the breath. And it also has a little, we said that compassion is relational. It has a kind of a relational element. In other words, to feel the rhythm of the breath, to allow yourself to be held by the rhythm of the breath, maybe even internally rocked and caressed by the rhythm of your own breathing. And it's quite amazing. If you sit down to meditate with the idea, I'm going to teach my brain to be more concentrative, there's a kind of a work element that makes people really not want to do it. But if you sit down and you allow yourself to be aware of the rhythm of your breathing, and you let yourself your whole body be gently, subtly rocked by your breath, allowing yourself to be internally caressed by this rhythm, which is happening anyway, independent of you, you become the recipient of something very beautiful. And that then warms up your awareness. So this is a kind of quality that's actually infusing everything that we do. And we bring it also to breath meditation. Now, another really important thread that runs through the MSC program. Remember I said we're going to talk about challenges and the way that we work with challenges? So earlier I said love reveals everything unlike itself. We also say that when we give ourselves unconditional love, we discover the conditions under which we were not loved. So inevitably, people notice that sometimes when they practice self-compassion, they feel really good. Sometimes they feel bad, and sometimes they feel nothing at all. But they want to know, why do I feel bad? They want to know. They need to know. And the reason is because we only know anything by contrast. And when we say to ourselves something like, may I begin to accept myself as I am, we begin to immediately think of the opposite. In other words, when we were not accepted as we are, or unacceptable parts of ourselves. And when that happens, that's called backdraft. And in fact, we're likely to feel worse. But it's actually a good thing. It's a good thing because this is getting stirred up by the infusion of loving kindness and compassion. And as it gets stirred up, what we're feeling, it's not like it's there forever. It's actually passing through us. It's leaving. Jinpa wrote said in a beautiful interview in Mindfulness journal that self-compassion is reparenting. And this is precisely how it works. It works through the vehicle of backdraft. When you give yourself kindness, you discover the opposite, but then you meet that disturbing, whatever the memories or whatever it is that gets stirred up in backdraft. You meet it with mindfulness and compassion, and then you are actually healing that wound. So self-compassion training is not a therapy, but it's very therapeutic. It's a resource-building program in which we give ourselves this kindness. This kind of stuff comes up, but we teach people how to meet backdraft with mindfulness and compassion. In other words, not with resistance, not with fighting. That's what keeps it stuck in place. That's what actually intensifies it. What we're doing is learning how to hold this difficult experience in a new way. And that is ultimately transformative, and it has a reparenting aspect to it.